start for now. And if more people come in, then they can hopefully catch up. So I would like to thank everyone who is in attendance right now in our audience. It's so great of all of you to take the time out of your day to come and join us. And I also want to thank our two panelists who I will be introducing pretty soon, who have both graciously offered to share their knowledge and time with us. And we're very, very grateful. But before I get into that, I would like to give a land acknowledgement. T3 Dunia Theater is committed to engaging our community in dialogue at the intersection of socio-political issues and art. It would be hypocritical to discuss imperial violence in any form without talking about the colonial violence perpetuated by our settler state, Canada, here on Turtle Island. T3 Dunia Theater creates and operates in Jojage on the unceded territory of the Ganiga-Haga people, who are the rightful custodians of these lands, waters, and resources. We are deeply saddened by the history and ongoing legacy of colonialism, and remain committed to fighting for Indigenous rights and sovereignty as key guiding principles to decolonization and reconciliation. We intend this land acknowledgement to openly explore our responsibility to redress the generations of colonial violence that is the legacy of settlers on this land. We encourage everyone to further educate themselves on the history and current colonial forces that have and continue to shape present-day life across Turtle Island, and to take action to support Indigenous peoples in anti-colonial struggles to return unceded lands. These actions include stopping the development of pipelines, making efforts to end the war on Indigenous women, and ensuring no Indigenous children are ever stolen or murdered again by acting upon the 94 calls to action put forth by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. As such, we would like to invite everyone to take a moment right now to acknowledge and to reflect on the rightful custodians of the land that you are currently located in. We encourage you to look up information about your area if you are unsure. And let us begin by learning and acknowledging our relationship with colonial violence together. And so now I think it is time to introduce our fabulous, marvelous panel. First, we have Mariah Ingar, an actress, director, and producer who has worked over a wide range of mediums, including theater, film, music, radio, and video games. She is vice president of Black Wealth Media, a company that produces and distributes Afrocentric content across television and the internet, a mentor to emerging artists with artist management partners, a member of numerous boards, including with the Alliance of Canadian Cinema, Television, and Radio Artists Union, and also a proud mother. Mariah has much insight to offer us on EDI and anti-racism in the arts. Next, we have the wonderful Deborah Ford. Director, playwright, and mentor, Ford has been working in professional, community-engaged artistic work since 1999. She studied theater and development at Concordia University. As a director, her work includes Brian James's Terminal, and Rahul Varma's State of Denial. She has supported and mentored numerous emerging artists with the Black Theaters Workshops Youth Works program, and was executive director of the Quebec Drama Federation. Currently, Deborah Ford is the Director of Operations with the English Language Arts Network Quebec, ELAM, and continues to support emerging artists and community-centered theater initiatives. I would just like to let the whole audience know before we get into questions. The way this is going to go down is that I am going to be asking Mariah and Deborah some questions for the first bit, probably for roughly about an hour, and then I'm going to open up the panel to questions from the audience. So if anyone in the audience right now would like to ask a question, you may do so. The way if you want to submit a question, what you do is you're going to see, you kind of squiggle your mouse and you can see a little box on the bottom of your Zoom screen that says Q&A. You can type your question in that and that will go to me, and I will be able to ask it to Deborah or Mariah or both. I also just want to let everyone know that this event is being recorded and it's being live streamed to YouTube. So if you have friends or family that want to attend, but they can't quite figure out Zoom, they can they can watch it on our YouTube. And if they can't attend right now, but they really want to see what's going on, they want to hear this discussion, they want to learn and grow and have all that great stuff happening, they can click onto the YouTube link after this panel is over and be able to watch it afterwards. Okay, so let's jump into it. So to begin, I think it's important to acknowledge that many people have very different ideas and understandings of what equity, diversity, inclusion, EDI means, what it can look like, what it is, because different institutions do different things with it, whether it's two different theater groups or universities and theaters, they all do different thing around it. So to help us kind of grasp, what we mean when we're talking about in this panel, what is EDI? I want to ask you both, like, what does EDI mean to you? How have you engaged with it? How have you experienced it? How do you understand it? I will direct this to Mariah first.
Man, I wanted Deborah to start.
Nice try.
Well, it comes from the principle of having basically equality and equity, for all in the arts and in all practices. And so there is this kind of movement where there's a title, and the equity and the diversity and the inclusion within this universe of our business. It really just means that we all have the right to be seen, to have our stories told, to be in the stories, to produce, to write, to direct, to exist in this business and the industry that we love so much. People like Deborah and I grew up our whole lives, never seen the stars, never seen the superheroes, never seen the princesses looking anything like that. So this is to curb that and to change that and to change these practices and these old kind of colonized beliefs for the future, so that no kid ever grows up again looking at something beautiful like a film or art of any kind and not being able to recognize some identity of themselves in it. And hopefully, if we can do it on these small platforms in theater and in film, that it'll grow and it will become a global norm. That's the basics of it. There's many principles and many ways to do that and many hardships within it. But that's the basic of it, is that we all belong, and therefore we should all be able to create, and we should all be seen, and we should all have a voice.
Deborah?
Yeah, I'm going to really go with each word and define them how I see them. So I'm going to start with diversity, and I think that diversity actually can also, make a diversity / representation. And for me, that's all about who's at the table and who's not. Then we talk about inclusion, and it becomes who has a voice at that table and whose voice is being diminished. First day with new tongue, folks, sorry. Whose voice is being diminished or whose voice is being silenced. And then equity for me is about leveling the playing field so that everyone can bring their best to the table. And I just want to pick up on something that Mariah said, and that is growing up without seeing yourself represented in the world. And while that in and of itself is a challenge, what's even worse than that is the fact that I am absent there means that outside of there, I'm considered that I shouldn't belong, right? So suddenly I want to do whatever I want to do in this world, and never mind within the world of theater, but just anything in this world. I've had a dramaturg tell me that I had to rewrite a character because he was a Black man and I made him a judge. And she told me that that was not going to be credible. Why? Because she'd never seen a Black judge in her life. The fact that I had several in my family didn't occur, didn't make a difference. And so it's really, it goes beyond just about making me feel good about me. It's about making sure we understand that I have as much of a right to a place here as anyone else. And more importantly, that if you give me my place, I can contribute in a way that'll move us all forward. So for me, that's the grosso modo of EDI.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. What are some EDI initiatives that you've seen or overseen in your line of work? I'm going to direct this to you first, Deborah.
Well, I'm going to just claim it right now. I'm 56 years old. So I've been at this for a very long time. And in fact, I've kind of slowed down on this subject because I've been at it for so long. But I'm going to go way back to the beginning of this, the movement around EDI, which really wasn't around culture at the time. The very first case that started making a break here was with female firefighters. There was a time in this province where women couldn't be firefighters. And because of a complaint to the Human Rights Commission, who got involved, they recognized that the issue wasn't that women couldn't do the job, it was that the standards set to be able to become a firefighter was such that even the men who held the job couldn't do the job, right? You had to be able to carry so many pounds, you had to be able to do certain things. And the investigation led to the recognition that there was a systemic problem that was acting as a barrier to keep women out. And more importantly, that when they dealt with those barriers, not only did it open the door for women, but it also opened the door for men who couldn't get in. Men who, for instance, were born a little bit shorter than some others. So that's, I think, when it comes to EDI and the arts, you'll probably hear this evening some cynicism from me, some anger around this. And I think that's where it comes from, is that we've been at this too long to pretend that we're new. And there are great initiatives out there, and we tend to pretend like we have to invent this wheel. And it's quite frustrating for someone like me, who was doing it for 25 years before I came into theater, to walk into theater. I mean, I'm just going to give this as an example. I went back to school at 40 years old. I walked into a theater department that had zero diversity on its staff. We are now talking 10 years later. I made a point of visiting the website before coming to this meeting. And I can tell you there is still no one on the permanent staff that looks like me. Now, that's not to say they haven't diversified, but I'm saying there's no one that looks like me. But yet when you visit their ads for school, you'll find me in the ads. Right? Because I was that brown face who was foolish enough to trust my school and allow myself to be used. So how many kids who are people of color are seeing that ad thinking that, oh, I'm going to go to this school where it is inclusive, where they're going to think about me and they're going to have the experience I had, which was within a month of going to school, I was in flight or flight mode. I was constantly asking myself, what am I doing here? And thanks to some really great people, I stuck and I fought it out as long as I could, and was recognized there is a place for me here. It's just that my place is fighting all the damn time. So I've kind of taken us off subject, but in terms of initiatives, like I said, I think there are a lot that is being done, but that we're not taking advantage of what we know already. I think that we are fracturing in our approach, which we could learn some lessons from the feminist movement. The feminist movement took hold when we started recognizing it wasn't a woman problem, but a human problem. And as soon as we started inviting men into it, not to lead the movement, but to be allies, suddenly life changed, right? When we started saying to men, hey, did you know that you have heart attacks faster than we do? And there's a reason for that. Suddenly there were people willing to support us. Suddenly there were things changing. And so one of the things I think we have to be very careful of in the arts is that we don't fracture the discussion to this group and that group and this group, but rather to bring us together and say, okay, what are the changes we need to make so that everybody benefits from it? So that we don't have groups competing with each other, because that's another one of the games, right? We invite people to the table, we throw a few crumbs on the table, and we say, hey, y'all fight over those crumbs. Meanwhile, I'll take this pie and go sit over here with my buds and eat the pie. Right? And again, I'm sorry, Mariah, I want to come on in because I can go on for hours here and I'm all over the place.
I mean, a lot of what Deborah's saying is the reality of it. I'm in my late 40s, looking at 50 very close. And I've been doing this my whole life. And I didn't even know I was working towards a movement, because I didn't know that it was not normal to be the only person of color in every single environment that I was in at all times. I didn't know that those crumbs were not fair, so I was totally somebody in the arts who was like, thank you, sir, thank you, stay quiet and be happy, and aren't you lucky you're working? And I did all of that for years until one day it hit me and I was like, why is this okay? I think it really hit me because my son started, seeing things and saying things back to me. And all of a sudden I was super enraged when it involved my child, but I had completely forgotten about myself. And so that kind of tweaked my understanding of what I had been basically, accepting of for so many years. And that's when I actually started like coaching and training emerging artists. I wasn't going to become a lawyer. I wasn't going to become some, real activist. I am technically an activist because in every conversation there's a point to be made, and that is activism, because I am active in the conversation. But my friends who are real activists, they're the ones who are really on those lines, taking very dangerous, positions to fight for us. So I don't want to pretend I do what they do. What I do is I realized the one place I had strength was within my experience. And in my experience was being an artist, was having to overcome, having to deal with everything, not just because I was Black, but because I was a single parent, because I had no money, like the whole, and I had chosen the arts as an industry. So I was, suffering in those kinds of categories on top of being a woman of color who had basically no opportunities in comparison to everyone else. And when I kept going through it and kept defending myself and being in these spaces and started speaking instead of hiding and started speaking out, I realized I actually am okay doing this. I'm actually comfortable enough to take the punches that might need to be, coming my way because of the ignorance and the lack of understanding in my environment. And so I kept going and I got louder and louder and angrier and louder. And then I thought, I can't just be this ball of anger either. I have to do something about it. Part of that is creating a safe, not even a safe place, but like an environment where others can come up and ask questions and learn and have a bird's eye view on what it used to be like and what it is today and where do we need to go. And so I started training, I started coaching, I started mentoring, and I used to do it just for young artists. And then I started really crafting to marginalized artists because it's not just a Black issue, it's an LGBTQ issue, it's an ageism issue, it's it's a neurodiversity, physical diversity issue. There's so many levels to this inequality. But do I feel like, and I've done many, many initiatives and I will continue to do so because that is who I am. And that is where I think we need to be, is to move forward and to keep pushing the boundaries. However, the realities is that we are all stuck in a systemic situation that has been embedded into our industry, into our culture, into our environment. And that's not just Canada, that's North America, that's, it's big. And it's this colonized idea of how theater should be produced, of where stories should come from, how they should be produced. So for me, it's a little bit like, quite frankly, I'm kind of like, I got to be in it to be able to blow it up. Like I'm totally like, let's burn the house down and rebuild. I'm totally in that thought process because I have no fear, because I'm smart enough and good enough and brave enough, and because I'm somebody who believes that if I don't take part in this, then who else will? Because I'm willing to do it, because I'm not willing to stay silent anymore. So, I do initiatives all the time, but I really think just walking into a room is an initiative. It's like, accepting the gig, being on a panel, talking to emerging artists who are afraid, who are saying, how the heck, am I going to be okay in this business? I think anytime you take the time to help them, help the younger generations or emerging, regardless of age, is how we start making change. And I think you need to be in to do it. I don't think we can be on the outside and have conversations with it. I'm willing to have the conversations, but I don't think that actually does much. People talk a lot. They don't do a lot. So I'm all about the doing. It's where I'm at.
So Mariah, actually, because you talked about a little bit about your work in a mentorship capacity, and I really want to ask this question to you because of your ongoing work as a mentor to emerging artists. But I would like to really dig into what are the specific benefits and shortcomings? Where does EDI come to, and where does it stop when we're looking at emerging artists?
Oh God, I mean, the realities are that emerging artists are, today is a completely different world than it was when I was coming up. When I was coming up, and I'm sure Deborah can attest to this, I also worked in marketing and worked in corporate world. So I had that reality too to confront, that you were never in a room filled with people that were like you, or just diverse in general. Like, give me a whole brand of non-white, it never existed. So to have these conversations were very uncomfortable and were not only triggering for oneself, but they were dangerous. Like, they were dangerous to have. So today I've got, emerging artists around me and, who are bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, just like anybody who's starting their careers and looking at it, but they have all this information. They have the internet, they have access to so many, details. So they come in kind of already armored. The problem is that they're armored in the wrong way, because they're still being taught in a colonized, in an old school mentality, colonized environment. So their armor is still structured to fit this world, or to not fit at all, which makes them ostracized. They're getting angry at the wrong people. They have all of these kind of misconceptions on how to actually involve change, because you can now globalize on Facebook and do a hate session on Facebook. That's not changing anything, right? So to work with a mentor like me and to hear the stories and to hear the conversations and to hear what the past was, it's not about, oh, when I was young, it was so much harder. But yeah, it was. And so was the generation before me, but it's more about, we are still having the same arguments today. We are still asking for the same crumbs today. And it's still the same people in power telling me I'm not allowed. So we have to have different conversations and we have to break it down differently. And the beauty of it is that you have all of these kids who are so knowledgeable, who are ready to speak their minds, but now they need to be taught in the right way, because they can hinder it as well. And so my worries come to like where it becomes so combative, and it's about, still being afraid and still thinking that, stomping our feet down and yelling really loud and saying, I want to have my space in the, in front of the camera, and I want my stories and still creates this non-movement aspect to this issue. We did colorblind casting. That was like a huge thing, right? That we brought in everybody who was supposed to be our allies, thought that they were doing us a favor by, bringing in diversity by colorblind casting. That's detrimental to us as people. But a lot of my emerging artists would think that would be a great thing because of what it used to be like. So it's those kinds of misconceptions, misunderstandings, being almost given too much information in the wrong way and not really understanding what we have overcome, what we have improved, and yes, how far it is. It's not just about being the token on the show. It's also about who's at the table, like Deborah said, who's at the table, who's making those decisions. All of that needs to be changed. And that's a much bigger work. So it's really about making sure they get the right lessons and are willing to keep going, and also still love what they do. Like you can't do this either if you hate everything about it either. You also still have to love yourself and love the life and love the people you work with. And so it's about teaching all of those. And I try and focus on that and, give them the balls that they need to speak up when it's time to speak up. I also don't want them to be hurt and be in a position where they just kind of go with the flow, because that's what we've always been taught to do. So changing. changing it within?
I have to say how important people like Mariah, like Wahona, Black Theater Workshop are here, because the one thing I would say to emerging artists is this is an area we cannot look to the system to help them get there. As Mariah was saying, they're still teaching the same old, same old. They may be adding new language and they may add a new chapter to the book, but they don't have the depth in this area. But the swing side of that, because I think sometimes it's helpful to when we're talking to young people, to energize them around the opportunities here. And I thought that Nathalie Mallet from CAM, Conseil des Arts de Montréal, she lays this out really beautifully for young artists coming into the field and for established artists. And that is that if you think EDI is something you can ignore, you need to start thinking about wrapping up your career right now. So let's just take it from a big picture point of view. We live in a country where the birth rate amongst Canadians is rather low. We have a quality of life that we enjoy and want to keep. And the only way you're going to do that is through migration. We also live in a country where arts is funded by public dollar. So if you continue to put on stage things that do not include us, that does not include my story, does not represent me, how long do you think it's going to be before these people say to our government, hey, you know what? We got healthcare to consider. We got, education to consider. We've got the garbage man to consider who serves me. And this art stuff has nothing to do with me and my people, so I don't want to fund it anymore. I think that's the message we need to get very clear here. We are talking about the survival, particularly of theater, because theater is not something that is thriving to begin with, right? We talk about we need to get butts in the seat. You need my mom's butt in that seat. I've said this from the time I started. And my mother wants to enjoy theater. Do you know she doesn't go to theater? Because she doesn't expect that story to include her. And I will include here some of the companies that are doing, culturally sensitive or culturally inclusive work, because it's still being, in that same frame of what is good, what is art. And when it comes to the issue of Edi, the thing that has held us back, in my opinion, why we're only getting around to this, is because we have hidden behind the word art forever. Whenever it came up, it was, oh no, we're the arts. We don't have to think about that. Oh, we're the arts. We're beyond that. Well, we are beyond that to the point that we're killing our careers. We're killing our field. And Edi is a way of revitalizing the theater, revitalizing our audience, and ensuring that there will be a future for us in a country where this is supported by tax dollars. So for me, that really is fundamental here. And for young people, what I say to them is, there are very few areas in the world where we can still be pioneers. Be a damn pioneer when it comes to Edi. This is the place where you can be a pioneer. If you are a designer, think about the fact that lighting my skin on stage, if you can do that, you are going to be worth money. When you can understand that the issue with my skin isn't the blackness of my skin, it's the green from my Jewish heritage hidden under there. It's the pink, you know what I mean? It's all the cream and the coffee that makes this complicated. When you get that as a lighting designer, you become the person who's traveling the world to do lighting. Rather than thinking of it as something that's going to challenge you and hold you back, see it as a challenge that can rise you up. And that's how we get the momentum to keep going. It's not just about fighting against something, it's about fighting for something.
Yeah, totally.
I actually want to kind of really tap into the answer you just gave there, because what was interesting to me is that you're noticing some of the distinct features of what EDI means for theater and the arts. And I'm especially interested because I know, Deborah, that you have this background in community development as well. And so, EDI is, it's not just becoming like this commonly talked about initiative policy when it comes to theater and the arts, but it's kind of something that we're seeing across various institutions in Canada. And when we look at EDI, where it is today in the theaters the arts, I kind of want to see, is it reflective of where Canada is as a whole? Or is it, is there something much more distinct about what is EDI when we're talking about artists and the theater?
I'm going to go out and say something that I know is going to get me pulverized, but as far as I'm concerned, theater in the arts in general that I have experienced is about at the same place as big business is. Community development, though, as a whole, which is interesting to me, because to me, arts is closer to community development than it is to corporations. But community development is like years ahead of this. There is no way I can walk into a meeting in NDG and be the only colored person in the room. There is just no way. That's not happening. But yet we still accept that, right? And unfortunately for me, I'm finding that a lot of the conversations we're having are performative. Because when it comes to the actions that are going to make change, I don't hear people talking about that. I know I make people uncomfortable often when we talk about this, because one of the things I point out is that, although we're all in this together, at some point, some people are going to have to go sit down to, in terms of leveling the playing field. And let's face it, that's why some of them are performing the gatekeeping. And I think some EDI conversations are really about that. It's about gatekeeping, not about opening, but about gatekeeping to keep, let's decide how this serves us and let's use it to our advantage. Now, our funding partners are driving this more so than we are in the beginning, because our funding partners knew exactly what Natalie Mallet was saying. I have to be able to defend my budget to the public. So tell me how this tax dollars I'm giving you is serving, right? And I think that slowly we're catching up, just simply because the dollars and cents of it make it so that we can't afford not to. I'm not saying there aren't some really good people out there committed to this, but I'm as an industry as a whole, I don't see it having the priority that it needs to have yet. Not that things aren't happening, not that there's not movement, but I don't think the momentum there is real yet.
I mean, for me, it would be, it's nowhere near where it needs to be. To me, that's a very clear reality. And like Deborah said, there are many people who are doing their best and who are really aware and are really focused on change, and are not even looking at it like, oh, I'm trying to be, equitable, and I'm trying to be inclusive. They really just want more voices, more faces, more, involvement, and are really trying to craft their seasons and their, like all of that. It's happening for sure. Definitely more than it did a decade ago, never mind 20, 30 years ago. It was non-existent. So it's happening, but we're so far behind. And the people who are making still the major decisions are still not diverse. So they can't speak to it of what it really means to be that excluded human, that excluded cultural group, that excluded, human in this world. Like, you can't. So even if you're fighting on my behalf, which is really nice of you and all, I'm still not at the table fighting for myself. And you're still taking all the space. So I'm still having to defend a decision, or, defend a reality of why I want to be in these rooms that are crafted for, people and the conversation and the story that wants to be told. It's still combative. It still comes down to money and cents. Well, I like this production house. Well, I know this theater, so I trust them. Don't worry, there'll be others there. It'll be okay. Look, we've had a diverse cast. That still doesn't make any sense to have a diverse cast if every other single person is white in the room. So we're going to do a Black story, but it's going to be white directors, white producers,
white designers,
white designers. Like, that still happens every day. So we walk into these rooms, sure, maybe once in a while you're like, oh, awesome, I don't have to explain what it's like to be a person of color with these other colleagues on stage. Oh, but I have to now have a 45-minute conversation with the director on why I can't say this. Like, okay, so it's like the change is like, you know, but it's the same as like telling gay stories and like, you know, it's like, it's everybody who's been put in this marginalized box is fighting for breath, you know, fighting for some kind of like recognition. And we're very far. And it's not because people aren't trying. It's just, I don't think people realize how deep into the crap we have been for so long that a little sprout of like something, people are like, see, it's amazing, it's fixed. And we're like, there are still ancestors that are still down there. Like we haven't even begun to create the forest yet. You know, it's very, very old. It's very hard. So there's a lot to go. There's a lot to do still.
And I will also add to that, the other challenge I'm seeing is that even when representation is being targeted, what I'm seeing is oh, there's a person of color, come on in. But once you're in, you better walk like us, you better talk like us, you better think like us, or we're going to slap that unprofessional label on you and you will be persona non grata across the board.
Yeah.
And I have to say, this is true of some of the people of color who have been in the field forever.
Oh, well, most people of color, people would assume that it's always in a room full of non-color, but the reality is that we've been assimilating for our entire lives, generation after generation. So you also have older generations or even young generations of people of color who are tagging the line, who are towing the line, who are, you know, telling you this is the way we need to speak and present ourselves and behave. And, you know, maybe that is a little too Black, maybe that's a little too scary, you know, maybe we shouldn't talk about that, you know, should we really be too gay on screen? Like, you know, those conversations are still happening because they've been assimilated. So, you know, even people who are trying to make change, there's a lot of people who have been, you know, what we call whitewashed and kind of colonialized in this world and don't even know it. So it's not even a black and white thing anymore. It's literally like old practices, burn the house down. Like that's,
well, it's an old game that we see perpetuated constantly. Take a small minority within a group, tell them that they're special. Yeah, and they will hold the rest of the group down.
Yeah.
They will act as gatekeepers for us so we don't have to do it.
Yeah.
And I see this constantly, absolutely constantly, of people who I love and admire looking at an actor and saying, oh, that person is no good. Meanwhile, that person is representing the exact what I want from the stage. They're giving me someone different that isn't normally seen on stage. They're bringing something different to the game. And, you know, what's really discouraging for me is that when you meet that person of quality as a young person, you know, you meet that kid who's in high school who says to you, you know, what do you think I should do? I'm loath to send them to theater school because I know the damage that can be done to their spirit, can be done to their, you know, to their craft. But yet we also know that theater school acts as a gatekeeper, right? Because as you said, Mariah, and this has to do with funding as well. If a show's not successful, it's harder to get the next one funded. So I want to bet on the sure thing. I know this kid coming out of that program. I know exactly what their training has been. I know that they're going to act exactly the same way. I want them to. It doesn't matter that all 10 people on stage are going to act the same way and make it look like the world is all the same. I'm going to get a guaranteed button seat, and that's going to pay. And so, you know, there are so many layers here that we, as going back to the original question of round initiatives, we have to be careful sometimes that we're not jumping into initiatives that are actually detrimental to us, particularly because I said funding drives a lot of this. A lot of the momentum that we've seen in the last little while has to do with funding, where the funding is, and funding shifts 10 years. 10 years from now, no matter what's happened, it's going to be, yeah, we've done equity and inclusion and we're gone. What have we done with those 10 years? Have we made the changes we need to, or are we going to be in the same place?
So I really want to kind of tap into this thing that you were really talking about how when we have, behind the stage who are making decisions and we don't see EDI in those spaces. Because what I think a lot of folks think of when they think of EDI, especially in terms of when we're talking about stage and art and film, is who are we physically seeing? Who are we physically seeing on stage? Who are we physically seeing on camera? And so it's really about and so it becomes this idea of representation, but representation without substance and without leadership can be essentializing or even harmful. And so this kind of begs the question of really what is the relationship between EDI and tokenization?
Oh, that's a good one. First of all, I want to be careful because when we talk about EDI, we often think in terms of Black, white, that kind of thing. And I want to be careful in saying that it's not about taking white people away and putting Black people in. It's about a mindset, right? There's some of the people that, in terms of who I am as an artist, I'm going to name drop here, Ted Little, Rachel Van Fossen. When I think of Rachel, for instance, Rachel used to be the was artistic director of Black Theater Workshop. And when I think about the show that made me decide to be a Black artist in theater, it was a show that she brought to Black Theater Workshop. And I would not have seen it had it not been for Rachel. All my favorite shows that were created under Black Theater Workshop's umbrella in the past were Rachel Van Vossen, Blackstone Bowl, all that stuff that, because one of the things that drives me crazy is that when we think Black theater, often the only thing we think of as, see as slaves, that not that those stories aren't important, but I've existed since then. My people have come a long way. I want to see some of the most morning stories. So when we talk about tokenism, that's where I get into this whole thing of act like me, think like me, behave like me. Because to me, that's how tokenism shows up in theater. It's not so much about, having one person in the room representing everybody and speaking for everybody, which we do, because we just don't have enough of us to go around. If we go to a community meeting and there's 6 workshops, well, the 6 people who are there, you have to go one to a workshop. That's just the reality. But for me, tokenization really is about, it's a form of gatekeeping, and it's about only choosing those people who are a reflection of yourself, who reflect your values, your beliefs, your way of doing things, and only allowing them into the room. And that in the end does more damage than good, because what we see, great example, Slav. Do we remember that number that came through, right? And how quick he was to point to the Black artists. Oh, look at my Black artists. They don't have a problem with this. Yeah, they'd like to eat. And there's so few parts that they took this part. You want me to condemn them for that? And that's where we have to be careful, because there were quite a few people that attacked those artists who were involved, who felt that they should have passed up the job. And as someone who's had to feed a child in my lifetime, I've taken on some jobs that I'm not definitely proud of, but you do what you have to pay the damn rent. But in some ways, they got attacked more than the person who made the decision to put this damn show on the stage, right? And there is a great example of tokenism in terms of, that's exactly why he brought them in. He brought them in so he could point to them and say, no, I'm not racist. No, I'm inclusive. And then we could play the shuffle. It's art. You don't understand art. If you got art, you wouldn't be making these complaints. Go sit down, Deborah, and be quiet. You don't understand art. You're unprofessional. Well, if that's unprofessional, I'll be unprofessional. I'll do the dance. Anyway, Mariah, what do you think about tokenism?
Well, I mean, to me, tokenism, I've been an artist who has been treated like the token a million times over. For me, it is a very clear thing of being in white spaces and being, oh, we need an Asian and we need a Black person, and like, let's go. Like now we filled out our, we've created our Benetton commercial, so we're good. See, we're all inclusive. It's all beautiful and we're all here, but there's no substance behind it. Tokenism to me is about the lack of substance behind it. I don't mind being the only woman of color in a room telling a story. If the story's good, if it makes sense, if my character's powerful, if the surroundings and the subject are worth telling, and there's integrity in what I want to present. It's not about being the only person of color in the room. I've always been the only person of color in the room. I'm fine with that. That is the world I know. It's okay. But what is the purpose behind it? When you start taking people of color or, you know, intersectionalities and you start putting them in these pockets to appease a visual, to be quiet, to hush a conversation, then that is tokenism. That is dangerous. That is dangerous for anybody who is the token, depending on what the subject is, right? It just happens to be so evident and so consistent with people of color. And the reality is like this whole, I mean, we already know what the indigenous have been going through forever, like, but we're speaking on that in a completely different, respectful way, because the torture has been so real and the torture has been so loud, but they also moved on without us. They also said, you know what, we're going to create our own stations. We're going to create our own networks. We're going to create our own environment, because you guys will never get it. And you have never respected us enough. So we're going to do it over here. Us people of color, Black people specifically, we have big voices. We have huge, we spend a lot of money in these communities. We are participants in this community, and we still have no voice and no vision and no view. So this tokenism has been to appease us. And that is harmful. That is painful. And when you are the only person of color who has been handpicked to put into a room or into a show or into a category, and you got a nice little pat on the head, and you have been considered the special person of color in that room, you are now taking on the brunt of everyone behind you who is angry. We have been taught to fight for that one crumb. So even within our own communities, we have been taught to fight each other because there is only one crumb to have. And tokenism just perpetuates that self-hatred, self-denial, self-disrespect, and not helping each other grow. So it's a very, it's quite, and also it perpetuates this idea that your environment out there, you know, that your day-to-day is only filled with like, what, one kind of Black, one kind of Asian, one kind of LGBTQ, like what, like there's only one of us, you know, nice little pat on the head, be quiet, sit in the corner, see, you're represented. Bullshit, you know, so tokenism is dangerous, very much is, just like colorblind casting, very dangerous.
I really want to go in with this idea of, you know, when you have one kind of representation for a person, how does EDI in the arts take intersectionality into account, if at all? Does EDI, because I think a lot of people when they first hear it, they might think, you know, about race and ethnicity, maybe religion, but does it also look at the other overlapping factors like class, gender, sexuality, age, ability, and these other things that, you know, also come into consideration when we're talking about lived experience, when we're talking about real people?
Well, here's the thing, Zachary, you know, we are human beings. And we do have a bad habit of only being able to focus on one thing at a time, you know, between Facebook and, you know, TikTok and all that, we're getting worse and worse at that. And that's why I say, I think we need to develop language at the start that takes everyone in. Because this approach, the piecemeal approach of looking at one group at a time just fractures us. And I think there is language, there is initiatives, there are things we can do that level the playing field for everybody, so that one, you know, groups don't start competing with each other to be heard either. And I think that approach, anytime you can take an approach that counts more people in than counts more people than out, it just moves things along quicker. But I think at the same time, you know, we are quite deep into this discussion, and I do want to put a ray of, I've promised myself I'm going to be a beacon of light this year. That was my New Year's resolution. And so I do want to put a beacon of light in here in saying that when I came into the field 10 years ago and first started talking about this, it was like, what are you talking about? We don't talk about that. That stuff doesn't matter. Don't worry about that. Just focus on your art. And we are coming a long way along that. Now, most organizations cannot, continue to function without having some understanding of EDI. I think where we are now, particularly when we talk about issues of tokenism and this kind of thing, is that, and I want to put a disclaimer here in the sense that this is work that Elan is currently doing, and I don't speak for Elan tonight, I speak for myself, but I just want to put that out. It is time that we come together. We talked about definitions at the top of this. We need a shared definition around these things so that we're all speaking the same language. And I would like to see a community-wide action plan that has both accountability and very clear markers of where we're going. Because our funders want to support us, but they can't lead this discussion. And so we need to give them the tools they need to support us. And I do believe that there is more people, especially, watching what's happened in the States. I think there are more people who start to understand that their survival and the best interest is in EDI. I just think that there are a lot of people who are afraid of it because, when you have privilege, the hardest thing to do is give up privilege. And the only way you can help people to give up privilege is to let them see that they're going to be better off at the other side of things. And I think we can do that. I think we, as a community, we can come together and do that. And I'm going to admit that I've lost my train of thought in terms of where we were going this and throw it over to Mariah.
I will say this, though, I'm actually a very firm believer in something a little different. I actually believe that there needs to be different lanes. I think that the end goal should be that we all have some common language, some real clear path on what it does. I actually hate titles like diversity and inclusion and equity and belonging and all of this crap that is being brought around because it's as if I didn't already exist and I need to be under this like umbrella of titles to have a say, which already bothers me. But I do believe that, a group of Black people have their issues, a group of Asian people have their issues, the Indigenous have their issues, people over the age of 60 have their issues, people with, I do think we need to have rooms and lanes where people can discuss together, this is what hurts me, this is what I want change, and this is how I think we need to go about it, and then have a common group that those people get to go to, and we now flesh it out together on how we're going to make this equitable, how it's going to make sense for the country, for the industry and everything to create these, better paths for everyone. But my biggest issue with inclusion and with diversity, like these kinds of titles and stuff that has always been, is that we have put everyone under the same category. Like literally, if you break it down, unless you are a white, middle-aged cis man, you are diverse. So I have a very huge problem if we don't start to sit with our own groups and say, what is affecting us? What are the microaggressions? What are the macroaggressions? What do we need to change in the way that the machine works, that affect us directly? Because only I can speak to what affects me directly. And I have like-minded people and they go through the same traumas and the same heartbreak and the same, walls that they come across. So once we figured it out, then I can go to a bigger panel and I can say, this is what's hurting us. And that group can say, this is what's hurting us. Oh, now we can find the common denominators. Oh, wow, look, these things are affecting these three groups. Okay, that needs to be changed on a policy level, on an industry level, on a financial level, and all of that. But I do think it's important. I don't want to fracture anybody. And I definitely want us all to be together. And I want us to eventually have one voice. That's the dream. But I am fighting for people to be heard, really. And I feel like a lot of what we've done in the last 5 years have proven that is, speaking on our behalf, grouping us together, putting like one issue is the same for all, and when you look at stuff like intersectionality, I have friends who are, Black and queer, and they're like, I can hang out with the queer folk, of course, because those are my people, but they have no idea what it's like to be Black and queer, So I also need to go and sit with those people so that I can just be Black and, and understand, because that's something I can't change. These are things I can't change, and to put me in like this umbrella, like we are all diverse. We are all like, yes, I guess we are, because that's the way society built us. I guess we're diverse and unique or whatever, but we actually have full pools that represent the same pains and the same process, the same things we're trying to change. And I do think that we need to like create more spaces where people can be, Black together and Asian together and Indigenous together and gay together and whatever, whatever your marginalized, so-called title is, so that we can be strong in our units and then come together and then be strong against this, because the wall is mighty and big, so for me, it's to not be afraid of that either. I'm allowed
I don't disagree with you, Mariah. I absolutely don't. I do recognize that need for groups to be able to speak within the group. Where I'm talking is that at that next level, just like you were saying, when it comes to policy development, when it comes to those kinds of things, to be able to bring those groups together and find that shared language that then allows it to address the wide, I can take this one piece of legislation and I can advocate for all these groups.
Yeah, 100%.
One piece of legislation. We're on the same page there. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I will ask you both one more question, and I'm going to open it up for Q&A from the audience. I'm going to direct this to Mariah first. So just to end things off, how can audiences or the general public best support BIPOC, queer, disabled, neurodivergent artists? Is it by supporting arts companies that have well-realized EDI initiatives, or is there more that people and audiences should be doing or should be thinking of doing?
Well, for one, obviously, support the art that is being done that is under these, so-called titles or boxes or whatever it is. All of it is bad, but it's okay for the sake of the conversation. Go and support that art for sure. But I want to be clear, to support it doesn't mean that you have to love it. If it's bad art, it's bad art. Like Black people make bad Black plays, just like gay people make bad gay plays, like bad art is bad art. So I think you just should be true to an audience, but you definitely have to not take away your fear and enter into those rooms to the first place, enter into those rooms and go and participate. And if you're a theater goer or a participant in the theater community or film and TV, participate in those rooms. So that's one. Two is don't be afraid to demand better and to demand more. Like, people are constantly writing theater companies and artistic directors and saying, oh, wow, that was great. And, giving donations and but they never like request what they would like to see. What would you like to see? What would speak to you? Does it speak to you? Is it is it even part of your vocabulary or your world? Like, ask for better, ask for more, but then also like call your people out. Like for me, silence is violence. And for too long, I have a lot of people who say that they're my allies, but boy, are their mouths, shut when something uncomfortable happens or a conversation is not really where they want to be. And they don't call their own people out. Like the conversations, the real change is going to happen when people who are not in these marginalized communities are having real conversations about why that's a problem and understanding their racism, understanding their privilege, understanding their positions of bias within their own groups. Don't come to me and tell me that you love me or that you want to support me or that, yay, Black. Like, I don't give a crap. Like, I can't change this. It's not going to change anything for me. But maybe you can teach somebody in your community. Maybe you can push, open up the curtain for somebody in your realm who would have never considered it because the conversation didn't exist before. So it's like, if you really believe that there is room for this kind of change and that it's not, and you're not scared and you don't think we're going to take away all the white people jobs, and we're not gonna and like you guys are all gonna be like lost now, all lives matter. We get it. I always thought like it should have been. It always irked me. It should have been Black Lives Matters two. Then we would have gotten rid of all of the Karens and all of the anger. It was, we exist too. That's all. We just missed the two. That's all. We would have never had the argument of everything else. Anyway, but like just to change the conversations within their own spaces. It's the same thing as the Me Too movement. Nothing about the Me Too movement was that now we hate men. But it also didn't mean that men needed to start like walking in front of women and like, you know, like pushing every male around them. It meant that they needed to call their shit out on another man when he's slapping some girl's ass. Hey, you know what? Not cool. That's the conversation that needed to begin, right? The awareness within the male groups who were these sexist, you know, kind of backwards thinking humans. When those men started having conversations, the Me Too movement became palatable for everyone, because then it wasn't about me. You weren't trying to, I already know what it's like to be a woman. I already know what that feels like. Go teach your people. So I think a lot of that's where the audience needs to start going. Go and see the art, support the art. Don't be afraid to ask for new art, and don't be afraid to have the conversation within your own circles. Or we're just going to keep repeating the same stories, and, you know, we're going to start, it's just going to keep going.
I have to echo what Mariah is saying, particularly on the speak up, act out part of things. Because here's the thing, I don't expect an actor to do it. Particularly in Quebec, where language, you know, let's lay that language over it as well in terms of the opportunities that are out there. I can remember in theater school, there's a teacher who does this lecture about never tell your truth in public, you know, and he tells the story about how, you know, you're sitting at the bar talking to a colleague and you're downing the show, and someone sits next to you and says, you know, by the way, that was my show, what would you do? Now, I'm a grown-ass woman, and I tell my truth. I told the teacher at the time, I would turn to the person and say, oh, thank God, now maybe you can explain some shit to me, and I would continue my conversation. But that's not how theater works. Not in Quebec, anyway. What I learned in this field is we don't talk to each other, we talk about each other, because we're all worried about where we're going to get that next job. And so the public has a vital role to play here, because they can afford to say things that we cannot. And I'm, you know, so I agree. Put your money where your mouth is. Go make sure that, you know, do what I do. Do your due diligence. There are people in this field who do wonderful work, and I haven't seen their work in years, because before I buy a ticket, I pick up that program and I look. Who's in this show? Who's behind this show? And if there's no diversity in the show, I don't care how much I want to see that show. I am not paying for that ticket. Now, that's the first step. But if you do that and then are silent, it doesn't do any good. What you need to do is pick up the phone and call the Centaur and say, hey, I was looking at your season this season, and I won't be at any of your shows this year. As much as I love your company, I'm not coming to your shows because there's nothing there for me. And I will keep an eye on you, and as soon as you have something for me, I'll be back. And when I say something for me, and I call out the Centaur simply because the Centaur is doing a really good job in this area, and so I don't have to worry about downing them on this, because, you know, they are partnering with theater companies. They're bringing those shows in. We are seeing a lot of people who are having the conversation, but are putting no action behind it. We have seen some serious movement in the community this year in terms of those old-time jobs coming available, being refilled once again, without including us. And those same people are writing me and talking about, will you give me money? No, I will not give you money. I'm gonna give my money to T3. T3, who hires people who look like me and puts us on stage first, because no one else will take a risk on us. Who will give me the director's chair, even though in the community, people are talking about, oh, that Deborah, she's a little bit hard to work with because she's got a big mouth. T3 finds advantage in that. They don't feel the need to tear me down and recreate me into the right thing. So you putting your money where that, go to the AGM, go to the season launch, share your opinion, call your MP. You can bet that every time a policy comes out, we are there making policy papers, making statements. As the public, you have the right to do the same. Get in the game. It's your tax dollar too. So that for me, the audience is a vital partner in this, because right now they are still putting, work on stage focused on the white male gaze. And of all people buying tickets, they're buying tickets the least. So why are we giving them the most stage on, the most room on the stage? So, they need your butt in the seats in order to sell that grant to the grantor. If your butt is in that seat and what's on the stage isn't what you want to see, then you are a part of the problem. If you are supporting a company that is putting color on stage, but the back office has no diversity, and you're supporting that company, you are a part of that problem. And so for me, the audience is vital here. Change will not happen if the audience does not join us in this fight.
All right. Well, I guess that means we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. We already got 3 in. I'll start with the first one. The work of EDI and mentoring is not evenly born. How do we make EDI something that everyone is responsible for and not just BIPOC folks?
Ooh, you said a mouthful there. Well, your question is well placed, because as we've been talking about tonight, if the people that are responsible for EDI are the people who have been the gatekeepers for generations, then we're going nowhere. We're absolutely going nowhere. The training is where it has to start fundamentally. It absolutely has to start at that level. And in terms of the responsibility, Mariah was saying, I have the ability, I'm not scared. And so I do talk up, but I do tend to pick places like T3 to do it. But I always think of what Chris Rock said. I didn't create the problem. I don't have the ability to change this. So I am not going to carry that weight anymore. So yeah, I'll be honest with you. When I walk in a room and I'm the only person of color and they're discussing EDI, I either leave the room or just don't get involved in the conversation, because I know that conversation ain't serious. And it's just going to drag me down and make it harder for me to keep the fight up. So yeah.
It's a delicate subject though. It's a delicate place, because for me, I actually will sit in that room and I will make my points very clear and I will call them out. And I'm not even talking about in a combative way. If they're having the conversation, it's because they're trying to figure something out and they're trying to learn something. When I get bombarded with the, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to be racist conversations that come our way, especially during the last BLM movement, those are when it's like, I'm done. Like, stop. Like, I'm not here to teach you. Go and Google it. Like, there's 8 million movies about it. Go and watch a doc. Like, I don't give a crap anymore. I'm not here to be, your history teacher. I definitely am fatigued on that. And I have, and I certainly don't feel like I owe you the conversation so that you get your shit together or that you understand the problem. But if I'm in a room, especially when I'm working and I'm in a room and there is that conversation, I do now, and I didn't before, but I do now speak to those people, because what I want them to do is I want them to also understand how little they are actually making in change. I want them to understand that the wrong conversations are being had, that if a whole group of people of non-color are sitting there talking about what they think should be done to fix the issue of EDI without people like me at the table is a problem. And so I need to let them know, because they're coming at it with an honest, good, open heart. This is a problem I have noticed. We should do better. And even though I just, said earlier on about the audiences that they need to have these conversations within themselves and push themselves, I believe in that. But I also you need to know what the hell you're talking about. You actually need to know what are our issues. It's not just because I don't see myself on screen. It's because I know that I'm not getting the money. I'm getting paid less. I'm getting no directors that are giving jobs. I've produced and directed 1 million projects, but because it's not under a certain heading, I'm considered a nobody, even though I can walk into a room and have 20 years more experience than the person who was given the job. Like, there's a big systemic issue here. And I do believe that a lot of people with good hearts who are having these conversations don't know the real process and the real problems. So I'm willing to have those conversations with those people. I'm not willing to have a conversation with those people. Then they have to go and do their research, and they have to go and do the work, and they have to move forward. But they do have to move forward. And what happens is that we have a lot of panels, a lot of conversations, a lot of people that are good intentioned and good intended and want to, give room, but then they don't follow through on it. They don't make change within their own companies. They don't hire new people. They don't tell news stories. They don't, they don't talk to their friends. They don't, or that's all they do. And then they don't put it in practice. So it's really like, it's not about just, BIPOCs having the conversation. We're having the conversations because we have no choice. We have no choice. Our worlds are the ones that are destroyed. Our worlds are the ones that are in the cages. Our worlds are the ones that are being ignored. So we have no choice. You have a choice. So choose to do so. You have all the control. You have all the privilege. You could take over the entire country and say, we are going to deal with this now. Like, it's not, I have to fight for that, right?
But yeah, Mariah, I hear what you're saying, and this is where I say I think I'm a little more jaded than you are, because for me, too often those conversations they're having, that's the sum total of what they're going to do.
100%.
They're going to spend this afternoon having this conversation, and then they're going to walk away patting themselves on the back for being willing to have the conversation. And me being in that room lends credibility to that process.
Yeah, 100%.
Because they're going to make sure that they're going to take pictures. And when those pictures go up online, even though I was the only one in the room and there are 10 pictures, I'm going to be in 8 of those pictures. So I'm going to make sure that I'm not in that picture, because I'm tired of lending credibility to that. And I think half the conversations that are happening in theater right now isn't necessarily about bon volonté. It's about funding. It's about money being available to do it and funders looking to see if you're doing it or not. And that's why I think it's dangerous, because I've seen, and that's where funders have an important role, and why we really need to start naming and being very clear about our intentions around this, because I've seen companies like Tisserie be unfunded while we hand money to companies that have diversity in their name, but when it comes to the actual work they're doing, they aren't interested really. Either they count us out because we speak English, because, oh, what an insult, how can you dare speak English in Quebec? Or they are eating off of us parasitically, right? So they serve us, but in their offices, the people who have the real jobs, who get the real pay, they don't look like us. They don't have our experience, but they go to the government on a regular saying, we're leading this discussion, look at us. 100%. They're not interested in solutions, because solutions would mean they can no longer eat out on this subject.
Yeah, no, I agree with you in the sense that that's often the way. I mean, that's a perfect example of tokenism, right? Like it's exactly that. It's just, I spent decades being quiet and being punished, and then I got loud, and I got very loud, and I started implementing change and making things happen. And one of the ways that I did that was making sure that I no longer stayed silent. And I get angry, I get very clear that I don't have any time. I'm too old, I'm too tired to like be nice. Like I don't have time to be nice anymore. I was nice for 30 years. I'm done being nice. So now I'm a bitch, sorry, but this is what you all created, and I go into those rooms. But I also know that I have had so many people speak on my behalf and have not known what the hell they're speaking about, and come and tell me after they have had the conversation about something that is actually going to hurt me because they did it wrong. So that's where I'm at now, where I'm like, screw it. I'll go in there and I'm going to teach you exactly how to do this conversation. That's why I'm in those rooms now, because I'm also tired of being given the wrong stuff.
So this next question, we actually got it submitted twice. Like two people asked essentially the same thing, so that's how you know it's a needed question. So can you explain more why colorblind casting can be problematic?
Oh my God, yes. Colorblind casting, my favorite. Colorblind casting came in like a long time ago, actually, but where it was most spoken about and it was kind of very public and very aware was about a decade ago. And it's obviously way more prominent in film and TV, but it happens in theater just the same. And it's really about where people were aware that people of diverse backgrounds and colors were getting really pissed off, obviously, that they were never being put in the forefront. They could never be the superhero. They could never be the, femme fatale. They could never, all the roles that you've always seen where, white and blondes and, all that kind of stuff were never given to people of color. Even if they were, 100 pounds, wet and, perfect breasts and like whatever your all American dream that you could imagine, but just happened to be dark skinned. So what they started doing is that they realized that that was a visual mistake and that people were speaking to it. And they started doing something called colorblind casting, where they would swap out roles that may have potentially originally been written for the typical white heterosexual, female or male, and then they would swipe them out and they would put a, oh, now this person's an Asian. Oh, now this person is going to be, African, like they would swipe them out. The problem with it is that they wouldn't change the stories. They wouldn't change the language. They wouldn't change accents. They wouldn't change any of the background of the actual character. And Quebec is a perfect example for that. They do it all the time in Quebec. So now you have La Famille, and family dinners. And, it's a Quebecois Pure Land story written, about a small family in Jonquière. And then how they went, oops, we need to put color in there. We're going to do colorblind casting. Look at how great we are. And now they swipe out everybody and they put them black and they're all Haitian, but now they all speak Quebecois and they all speak about their ideals and the way it was growing up in Jonquière, and has nothing to do with the people. Like, the story wasn't written for them. The story wasn't even written about them. So it doesn't make sense. You just changed the visual. You didn't change the idea and the concept and the character behind it, because nobody wanted to write stories for us. Nobody wanted to hire people who were writing stories for us. Nobody wanted to hire people who were directing stories for us. So production was staying the same. The writers was staying the same. The direction, like everything was staying the same. Just us visuals being slotted in. And that is, I think we literally spent maybe 5 years going, this is awesome. I'm getting auditions for all these roles I never got to audition for. It's awesome. And then you sit there on set and you're like, oh my God, I would never say that. I would never dress like that. I would never go to, what do you mean she wouldn't be yelling at her mom right now for saying that? The guy just pulled her hair and said a bunch of stuff about this. Like, all of these things that would be so unrealistic, unbelievable within a Black community. But now I'm in a Quebecois community, and I'm not saying that Black people aren't born Quebecers. Like, of course they exist, but that's a different story still. You're still the Black person in a primarily pure land, white, Quebec. And they view you differently, regardless if all you've ever known is Quebec and French. Like, so the stories were never changed. They would just swipe us in, swipe us out. And it's detrimental for us because we fell for it. We spent years going, thank you, finally, thank God, I'm on the screen, I'm on the stage, I'm being seen. And then we realize, crap, I'm being seen in the whole different light. I'm telling fake stories. Nothing is connecting to me. Nothing is true to who I am as a person, as an actor, as a character, any of it. It's not real. It's not real. It's like putting whiteface on. It's not real. It's whiteface, blackface, Asian face, like you name it, man. It's just a mask. And so that hurts after a while. You don't realize it at first because, like I said, you're just grateful to be working. And we have all done shitty roles that we knew were shitty on the onset, and we took it because we had to pay the bills. But when you discover that you've been in a shitty position and you didn't realize it because they promoted it to you or they presented it to you like it was a gift, and you really fall for that because it never existed before. And now finally I get to be these leads. So you think it's a gift. And then you realize, then you see it. And you go, wow, okay, you just tried to eliminate me and you used my color to make it beneficial for you, but you eliminated everything that my color stands for.
Thank you. Yeah.
Very
And-
problematic.
yeah. And I would go further on that. I said, first of all, for the actor, you're asking them to work with one arm tied around behind their back because they're not bringing the fullness of themselves to the room. But I would say to you, it's even more dangerous than that, because the insidious way in which it whitewashes history.
Yeah.
I am starting to watch more and more shows where they're doing this colorblind thing. And it's like, no, that wasn't the Black experience in the 18th century. But it's allowing people to now do the, oh, you know, these people complained, but it wasn't so bad. Look at these stories. We're seeing these stories, and she was the queen, and he was the prince, and he was the, yeah, that didn't actually happen. That's not real. And we were kings and queens, and we'd like to tell you that story, but we know that story's dangerous because then it tells you that we have the capacity. So you'd rather just slip us into your stories. But as you know, Mariah was saying, it cuts us off from the ability to make it even better. And I always go back to when I was in school, we were assigned Lear to study for a design course. And when we came to the class to discuss Lear and what we saw of it, I had such a different perspective from everybody else. And I knew it was because I was looking through the lenses of Blackness, right? That I saw the difference between father and daughter and country fighting. I saw these things and interpreted these people in such a different way. How exciting would that be on the stage? I remember having a young person coming to me in tears, an actor when I was in school. Why was she in tears? Because her teacher told her she could never do Shakespeare because she had a Brooklyn accent. You know what? I want to see my Juliet with that Brooklyn accent, okay? That's closer to my world, right? And what it's incredible to me, because Shakespeare wrote at a time, the world he's writing of is the most diverse in the world at that time. Between the ports and everything coming, this was a central place. And over time, we've taken out all the culture. And now we want to spoon feed it back in with this bullshit blind casting. Oh, please. Blind casting is dangerous.
I would never want to do any Shakespeare. I don't want Shakespeare anymore, not because it wasn't beautiful work and beautiful writing and so politically so relevant to the day, hello, you know, and all that, but because it has been taught and integrated into the school systems through a colonized view. So I don't want my people of color fighting for that. I want them to do new stories. I want them to tell other classics, because we have been perpetuating this old colonized belief system of how theater should be, what classics are, you know, all of this stuff. We never tell old folklore of, you know, of small African country stories or Caribbean stories or, you know, or Black American stories. You know, we never, unless it's about slaves, like we never tell, we had tons of folklore and everything, you know, and like, you know, she made the point of like colorblind casting, you know, where they're kings and queens and they're doing this today. And it's very detrimental on one side. On the other side, there's movie magic. I do love the fantasy world where when it's fictional of, you know, there is no color, everyone is, you know, everyone just is, and it doesn't matter, Black queen, green, you know, it doesn't matter. I love that. And I think we need to keep doing that. But colorblind casting is specific to a very specific type of story told, a story that is rooted in truth and being swiped in and swiped out, as if all that truth now doesn't matter anymore. That's where it's really dangerous. Fantastical and sci-fi and, you know, the magic of movie making and the worlds of theater, of course, you know, like keep going.
Fundamentally, coming back to the person's question, what is the problem with colorblind casting? Is it really does exactly what I was talking about before. It says, come on in, but don't be who you are. Don't think the way you are. Don't act the way you normally do. That's the price of inclusion. The price of inclusion is to leave your color at the door. Even though you're going to add decoration and color to the stage, you better leave it out the room.
Yeah.
That's the thing about colorblind casting.
And a weird one little weird concept that a lot of people of non-color don't really understand is that when you are a person of color in a sea of non, you have literally been taught to assimilate. So there's a certain way that you can speak in certain rooms. There's certain ways that you will dress, stand, present yourself. We have been trained our entire lives to assimilate in these environments. So, and we have been taught and shown our entire lives the world of white. So for us to tell a white story is very simple for us. It is what it is. It is the life we live. But for a white person to tell our story is astronomically hard because they have never needed to enter into our world. So that's why it doesn't get flipped over. It can't be flipped over. You know, you could never, it would be racist to tell a Black story as a white person, not because we can't do the like, yeah, but why not? Let's put on the masks. Let's be creative on both sides. You do it. Why can't I do it? I know that that's what everybody thinks should happen. The problem is you've never lived in my world, but I've grew up in yours. So we're not coming from the same points ever. And unfortunately, not ever will it ever be because of systemic racism, you know, like it's.
I don't know if I agree with you there, Mariah. I don't know about that idea that someone who is not of color can't tell a person of color story. I think it's hard to do it with integrity. But I definitely, and I think it's important that we lead these stories to a certain extent. But there's been people in my training and my development as an artist who were fundamental to my growth, who did it with a certain integrity, with a certain sensitivity, with usually with the idea of creating the space and then giving agency to others within the space to help make it, you know, a complete story.
But they gave you agency to tell the story that was relative to something. What I'm talking about is I walk into a room being the only person of color, and we're going to tell a story based on a little white girl that grew up in the prairies. I can assimilate that because I have been in those worlds. I have been in that just by being born in Canada. I have seen that. I have lived that. But my skin color has given me an experience in life, regardless if I know that story, that this person will never understand because her skin color has never given her that perspective of what it's like to be Black in my world. So it's not about being respectful, being smart. I think a white director can direct a Black story. I'm not saying that, but that's because there are Black people having agency on the story that they're going to present to a thing. You can't have a cast of white people telling a Black slave story. They would never be able to say it with truth. They could mimic it. They could imposter it. They could give you a version of what they think it must have been like. And I'm sure many have. I'm sure many have cried at every slave story they've ever seen and can understand the pain and the torture. And it's not like poverty doesn't exist in white circles, you know, like they live that too. They know what it's like to not be able to eat, you know, like those are things that we all can be similar on. But when it comes to me playing just the girl next door who is white, I understand, I have been in that world because everyone around me was white. But that white girl playing the girl next door has never been, very rarely, been the girl in a sea of Black. So for her to tell the Black's perspective of that is a completely different ballgame. Is it not possible? Of course it is. Anything is possible. It's art. We can all figure it out. We all can. And with a little studying and a few conversations and, you know, some openness, who knows what can happen. But the way the industry is today, I have had to assimilate. You have not had to assimilate into my world, ever.
I see what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying? So it's just, it's not interchangeable that way. It's my point. Not today. In 20 years from now, I hope there's not even a thought. I hope there is never, I need a Caucasian and I need a gay and I need a, you know, I hope in 20 years it is just, here's a human, you know, and this is their story, you know, come audition. I mean, that's where we want to get, right? But that's not where we are.
All right. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation. It's been really, I think there's been so much, we got into the good, the bad, the ugly of everything. We got into the nit and grit of all the stuff I wanted to get to. And I think this has been really enlightening, especially for me, but I've enjoyed it greatly. I want to thank again you both, Mariah and Deborah, for agreeing to come here and be in this space and share your knowledge with us. And a thank you to the audience again. So just a reminder to everyone, this is recorded. So if you want to check it out later, you want to show it to a friend or family member, you can just look up T3 Dunia Theater on YouTube, and you will be able to find the video there. But for now, I'll say, this is it. This is the end of the panel.
Thanks for having us, Zach. It was a good time. It was really good to see you, Mariah. We don't do that often enough now that we're all locked behind closed doors. So this was a wonderful opportunity to chat. I've missed you guys.
Nice seeing you. Thanks, everyone.
And folks, just to let you know, this is a part of the series, as I mentioned. So our next panel is called Difficult but Necessary Conversations. And it's going to be this Thursday at 7:30 as well.
And scene.